and welcome to Galley Stories, stories of the Bering Sea and beyond, hosted by Mark Kaler. My name is Penka Jane, podcast Deckhand and longtime listener. We'd thank you to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. Here's today's catch.
Hello guys, and welcome back to another installment of Galley Stories, stories of the Bering Sea and beyond. I'm your host, Mark Kaler. Today we've got a kind of a special guest for you. Some of you may know him from National Geographic's Wicked Tuna or the Outer Banks. We have Captain Dave Marciano with us today. Hi Dave, how are you?
Good, thanks. How's it going?
Excellent. Thanks for taking the time. Actually, we just got back from a tuna trip. We just landed close to a 300-pound tuna.
Yep, nice fish, beautiful fish.
We were going to record out there, but as soon as he put the pole in the water, we hooked on. So here we are. We're sitting on the FV Falcon at his slip, and we'll get this started. Dave, let's just go back to where were you born and what first got you into the industry?
I was born in Beverly, Mass. And, you know, what led me to fishing was funny. Nobody in my family fished before me. I had one uncle who, when I was a kid, you know, my father didn't even know the basics. He didn't even know how to put a worm on the hook, right? So I had this one uncle, his youngest brother, it was Joseph. So Uncle Joe was the one family member that took me fishing. And it wasn't much. It was just, you know, with a bobber and minnows down the pond, catching, you know, bass or whatnot, maybe some trout. But he kind of planted the seed. Now, unfortunately, that Uncle Joe, he passed away from leukemia when I was 27. When he was 27, I was about 8, right? Oh. So that was very hard on me. Again, because I was the one uncle, he kind of got me into fishing, used to take me fishing on the weekends, right? So that's the reason why, you know, my son Joseph, who you see in the show, I named him Joseph David after that one uncle who got me into fishing. That's how important it was to me. Now, I started out, you know, on scrubbing bait cups on the party boats, you know, taking passengers out for hire. And I did that for the first 15 years of my career. You know, well, before high school, I was actually in grade school when I had that first job, and then through high school. And then, you know, after high school, a few years after high school, you know, you get married and you have kids. So I gravitated towards the commercial end of fishing, you know, just to make more money and support the family.
Mm-hmm. What was your first commercial job then?
Commercial fishing?
Commercial fishing.
Well, my first commercial fishing job was on a gill netter. I was on the Seaforce 1 was the name of the boat, and the captain was Herbie Gleason, old timer. That was my first job gill netting, and I loved it from day one. Gill netting has always been one of my favorite fisheries out of all the fisheries I participated in, and that's what I wound up when I bought my own boat, my first boat, the Angelica Joseph. She was primarily a gill netter back at that time. You know, in the early 90s, we could make a living pretty much gill netting year round, and that's what I did with that boat. Except I lost that boat, and that was the first boat I purchased. She was an old wooden Jonesport lobster boat. It was 1.5-inch mahogany planks over oak frames. Beautiful boat. But we lost her January 13th, 2003, out fishing. We sank about 22 miles out. We were on our way home with a boatload of pollock and a boatload of nets, and the season was just winding down. And, you know, we, I believe what happened was we opened up a butt block, right? So, you know, most of you guys know a butt block is where two planks come together on the boat. Now, I had just refastened that boat 2 seasons prior. We put 1,500 silicone bronze screws in her, you know, 3 planks up from the waterline and down. We did the whole underneath, and there was 2 butt blocks. We replaced all the butt blocks on the boat, and there was 2 butt blocks that I just couldn't get to without literally, you know, ripping apart the cabin, right? Mm-hmm. And it was in the area of one of those butt blocks where the water started to come in, And the boat sank in 33 minutes from the time my high water alarms went off, and I, verified that in fact we were filling up with water. I notified the Coast Guard, and that was with 4 electric bilge pumps running, and because I knew what that boat was, it was an old wooden boat, and we fished hard, we worked hard. On that boat I had one of those gas-powered pumps, the same pumps that the Coast Guards dropped down, a 3.5 inch, trash pump, right?
Yeah.
Gasoline. I kept that brand new on the top bunk, and I had that running too. And with all those pumps running, she still stank in 33 minutes. And that's why I think it was rough out. We had seen worse weather than that, but just things went wrong. And I believe that plank was just pulling further and further back. And we tried to save the boat. We had 10,000 pounds of pollock aboard. We threw that over, and then we started to throw the nets over, and we couldn't keep up with it, and she finally slid under.
How many men were on board?
There was 3 of us on board.
Everybody's safe?
Everybody's safe. We're all here to tell the story, so, that's the good part. It's funny, my father, again, we didn't understand fishing. He was like, so, you going to get out of fishing now? You done? Right? And, less than 24 hours later, I had bought another boat with the cash I had on hand, even before the insurance money came through. And it was an old fixer-upper, another old wooden boat. And, it took me 2 months to get it ready to fish. But, I told my father, right, I says, and he's in the insurance business. I said, look, Dad, if the office building you worked in burned down, God forbid, and there was a fire, and everybody got out safe okay, would you get out of the insurance industry? Right? And of course not. Right. So, again, less than 24 hours later, I owned another 30-year-old wooden boat.
What was her name?
That name of that boat was Lucky Strike when I bought it.
Okay.
And we kept that name. I like that name.
Yeah.
The first boat, the name of that boat was Angelica Joseph, after my 2 kids.
Right.
At the time.
So how long did you run her then?
I owned her for about 10 years, about a decade. She was a good boat. That boat, again, I'm sure some of your listeners can identify, when you start out in the business, the biggest piece of the puzzle is getting a boat with good paperwork, good permits, or I believe out West Coast, it's getting good quota with the boat, right?
Yeah.
That's the real value. And so you make the trade-off between, getting that boat you always wanted and getting a boat with good paperwork. Right. And then over time, you graduate to the better boat.
Now, out here, is it transferable?
The permits are transferable. It's funny because in the permit it says non-transferable, but you get attorneys involved and all that, and it happens all the time, buying and selling of permits. But it's funny if you read your NIPS, your permit you get from the National Marine Fisheries Service, right on it says non-transferable.
So if you had the Falcon now, for example, you've got the quota or the permits on her.
Yeah, we got permits, so we're not dealing with ITQs.
So if you were going to go to another vessel, you could take those permits to that vessel.
Right.
So they're individually owned or vessel owned?
They are individually, well, yeah, I mean, the permit is in the boat's name, but it's also in the individual. Like, I could sell this boat and bring that permit to my next boat, or I could sell this boat with the permit.
So that boat was also gill netting.
Yes, the Angelica Joe. Well, with the Lucky Strike, like, I knew that boat was going to be kind of a temporary boat, because I wanted to buy a boat. I wanted to upgrade, but that got me back in the game within a few months.
Right.
And then a year later, I managed to find the Hard Merchandise, which is the boat everybody knows so well. Sure. And that was a good, it's just it's a 34-foot Novi boat. It's a Daniels Head Novi, built in Daniels Head, Nova Scotia. She's 34.8 long and 13.8 wide, so she's a great work boat. She's just slow because it's a work boat, but she's been a great boat. I love that boat, and my son took over that boat now. And then I have this new boat, the Falcon, which is a 43-foot Torres, built in 1986. And the Torres was built in Key West, Florida.
And the Falcon's quick. Today we were up to 20 knots.
Yeah. Today we're up to 20 knots, and we were just cruising. I could push it at just about 29 knots if I put it in the corner. Mm-hmm. She's got twin diesels. They're FPT N67s. They're 550 horsepower each side. Now these same blocks, it's basically the same block as a Cummins, or the Caterpillar straight sixes, right? It's the same block. It just depends on what company wants to tweak it from there, right? And we can get up to 720 horsepower out of these blocks, right? And they just come down with a computer. It's all electronic these days, right?
Program it.
And, program it. But out of the box, so to speak, they come with 500 horsepower. I had them tweak it up to 550 because I'm thinking longevity, more than getting that super horsepower for a short period of time. As we all know, and plus fuel consumption is another issue too. I mean, even though this boat, I do a lot more charters than I ever did commercial fishing, we still want to being fast is nice, but speed costs money. So we want to keep it manageable so it still works for my business model.
When you got the
Falcon? What?
No, when you got the hard merchandise, was that you were still gill netting with that?
Yeah, when I bought the hard merchandise at that time, 90% of our year was still commercial fishing, mostly gill netting, some long lining for bottom fish, ground fish long lining. But the fact of the matter was, because of federal regulation, there were times during the year when our income was off because we couldn't do what we used to do, and it's an old story in the fishing game. Things change, nothing lasts forever. So we did get back, into the the carrying passengers for hire, right? And that was just a way for those few months in the summer. The weather was nice. I didn't have a fast and fancy boat, but I drew clients by saying, look, this is what I do 365 days a year. Sure, you can go on those other boats, but those guys are part-timers compared to a commercial fisherman like me.
Sure.
So you want to go on a nice boat ride, and you want to come on this boat and get covered with fish blood.
Right.
So
doing tuna.
Yeah.
So
tuna and or ground fish.
Okay.
Bottom fish here, cod and haddock.
And when did you start the enterprise of commercial fishing tuna?
Well, that was always part of, as long as I've owned a boat, and even going back to when I was a deckhand, this tuna fishery, it's what's in our backyard. So, like any commercial fisherman, if the fish show up in abundance and you can make a buck doing it, that's what you're going to do. And, so tuna fishing has always been a part of our year as long as I've been fishing. It's just we use rods and reels in this fishery because that's the law. You can only harvest these fish with a rod and reel or a hand line or a hand-thrown harpoon. We're not allowed to net or long line or any of that.
Actually, it keeps the product that much better too.
Yes, it does give for a nice product, and it's what made this fishery super sustainable, I think.
You can't get them all.
Right, yeah. And we've watched, because again, during that time, when I entered the fishery, the good old days were gone. And all I did was hear about how good the fishing was before I was here, right? Mm-hmm. So we were kind of at that bottom point. And that was when fisheries regulations in this country in general were really just beginning to kick in. Because, in the past, and it wasn't fishermen, it was society, right? In the past, the attitudes were you never could catch all the fish in the sea. During that same time period, let's not forget, cities like Boston, New York, they would pile their trash on barges, the same stuff you put out the curb now. They would pile it on barges and bring it out 3 miles and dump it at sea, pull out the bottom from the barge, right? That was common practice back then. Now as a society, of course, we've come light years from that, and we know we can still have fishing, but we have to do it in a sustainable manner. And that's whether we're talking tuna or all those fish out that you guys catch out on the West Coast.
Now, you said that back when you started, it was still kind of right. The heyday had been gone. You've been hearing stories. Do you think that your son has the same sense of that it's less now than it was when you started?
Oh, no. My son Joe, and that's it. I've watched the fishery get nothing but improve during my career. And that's not only for tuna, for all the species we target here in New England. So I think that's a great thing. And I mean, let's face it, the United States, as leaders in the world when it comes to successful fisheries management stories, whether we're on the East Coast or the West Coast, we've done a pretty good job overall in this country. And I think that's even borne out with the statistics, not just Dave's opinion as a fisherman. I think, NIMS just published that right now, currently this year, they published it that, 91% of the species, the commercially viable species in this country, overfishing is not occurring, right? That's a good thing. That means we're doing it right in this country. We're fishing sustainably on whatever coast you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Fish and Game nationwide does a really, really good job.
Right. No, and it was a hard transfer, you know what I mean? I remember, it was funny, the guys who taught me, we used to know laws at all. So as soon as some laws started to come in place, it was hard on those guys, right? Now, at least I was at a point, my generation, I guess you could say, we never knew fishing without some sort of regulation. So, although there's been times where we've disagreed, and let's face it, we're dealing with the federal government managing and making regulations, there are times when we're not absolutely thrilled with how things are going. But overall, we all understand it's for our benefit, and we fully support what's going on. Because I see kind of a better future for my son than it was for me at his age.
Now, has Joe had any kids yet?
No,
okay.
no.
Okay, so but you do expect another generation to be coming on here.
Oh, absolutely. And again, I was the first generation of my family to fish. My father didn't fish, so Joe's really that second generation, and I certainly expect there'll be others.
Does that make you proud?
Absolutely. Because remember, I've come from a tough time. There was, when I started, there was, probably about 3,600. I think I used to know the stats really good. I was always very active in the council process and the fisheries management process. Now, when I was a young guy in the fishery, there was about 3,700 active permits in the commercial fisheries for groundfish here in New England. Right now, we're down to about 80, right? And I'm not thrilled with that, and that's why I walked away in disgust with the fisheries management process here in New England. I don't believe, although we have fully rebuilt fisheries, we went and put all the fishermen out of business.
Yeah, less boats, less crew, less...
Right, there's nothing anymore. We lost the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So even though we have an abundance of fish right now, prices are terrible because it's a fine line, fisheries management, between, restricting and rebuilding. And, you have to walk that fine line. If you lose the infrastructure in the boats like we did, at one level, it's what was the point of bringing the fish back? And I say that sarcastically, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I mean, of course we wanted to bring the fish back. But if you don't do it right and you lose the industry, at some level, you have to ask yourself, well, what was the point of that exercise?
Yeah, we were driving along the coast here the other day, yesterday I think, and came across a monument for Cape Ann, the first commercial fishing port.
It's the oldest fishing port. Gloucester has over a 400-year history of fishing here.
Yeah.
Gloucester, was what Gloucester, New Bedford. You had the whaling. Gloucester, you had this salt cod. Literally, those were some of the fundamental building blocks that helped build this country.
Sure.
Think about it. Without that salt cod at the time, back in the day when this country was just starting, was a commodity that was in demand worldwide, not only for the early colonies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everybody, yeah.
You know what I mean? It
wasn't like there was thousands of cattle here.
Right. There was that salt cod, and that had value around the world. That ultimately led to, so many things. Not only food for those early colonies, it became a commodity that when you think about things like East India trading, down in Salem and the spice trade and all that, when they went to get those spices, a lot of what they brought, as well as tobacco and other things, were salt cod from the colonies. That went around the world.
Mm-hmm. Building blocks.
Right. It was part of what helped build this country, without a doubt.
So now, as of today, you've been commercial fishing for how many years?
I've been commercial fishing for 30 years now at least. Yeah, maybe
30
more.
30 years. And in that time, I can imagine that the first vessel was tough to lose.
Yeah.
Would that have been one of your scariest moments at sea, or have you had...
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, that was because, again, I described it, it's like a car accident, right? It happens. You're aware of boats sinking in the fishing industry, but you never think it's going to be you. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And then all of a sudden, just like a car accident, that one time it's your turn. And, again, it was a little surreal, right? Because I'll never forget that moment. When I realized, at this point, the boat was so full of water that the only thing keeping her afloat was that forward momentum. And we had the hatches up, we could see the engine room, and you could see that water getting close to the breather on the engine, and we all know what's going to happen. Once the water makes it up to the air breather, it's game over. That engine's going to stop, and the boat was completely full. So, I sent the crew in the life raft. Now, right away, too, like after this happened, and the boats heard we had taken on water, within 20 minutes, we had another commercial fishing boat at least riding alongside. So he couldn't do nothing, but like we all knew, as long as we didn't do anything stupid and get stuck in the cabin or stuck in the ropes or something, even if we hit the water, the other fisherman was going to be right there to pick us up. So, but we knew we could see what was going to happen. So, we deployed the life raft. We were towing it from the mast. I slowed down just enough to let the guys get overboard. I cut the raft free, and they were pulling themselves into the life raft. And the boat kept going forward at that point. But, I knew once the engine stopped, she was going to settle right in. And that's in fact what happened. I made it about another mile further. The other boat was picking up the life raft with the crew in it. They were about a mile behind us, and then boom, the engine stopped. And, literally it went from, in that boat we had a much smaller cabin than the Falcon here, but I went from, once that engine stopped, and I just notified the Coast Guard. I said, we're going overboard, we're going in. They were en route at this point. And it took, in the 3 steps it took me to leave the wheel and head out the back of the cabin. By the time I got to the back of the cabin, I was, doing the breaststroke in my survival suit, right? Just to get clear of the boat. And it was, it wasn't outrageously rough that day, but it was, like today. It was, bumpy, rolly, but, not like life-threatening, oh my God, we shouldn't be here rough, you know what I mean? Just a tough day at the office for guys like us. And there's thousands of guys out there who do it every day. And, but it was surreal because now, that other boat's about a mile behind me. I knew they were coming for me. I'm in my exposure suit. Mind you, now it's January 13th, 2003. It was about 5 degrees out when we left the dock that morning in the dark. So it was cold. But those exposure suits, those guys, them, they're pretty good. They, you get it zipped up right, it's got nothing but your face exposed, right? Yeah. Except I had my hood down because I was talking with the Coast Guard, right?
Did you fill up?
Yeah, so we filled up. But, again, now adrenaline kicks in. But now the boat's gone. And we went from all that noise and all that chaos to it's just silent, except the wind, right? And the boat sank now, and she's just sitting there. And all of a sudden I realized, boy, is my fucking head cold, right? Because it was below freezing. So I got buckled up good and everything. But my suit was full of water. But, again, it's an exposure suit. It's going to warm up. And but that was like surreal. I even said it in an interview with the local paper at the time, because the boat sank, right? and she slid out of sight. And it was rough out now, 6 to 8 foot seas, and it was an old wooden boat, right? And I had some, my polyballs lashed to the rigging. That's where, we store that shit like a million other guys do, right? So the boat slides under, and on that boat, on all my boats, I had the American flag up there in the mast, right? Way up high. The boat slides under, and at some point, everything disappears, and it's all quiet, right? And then the cabin ripped off because of all the polyballs we had in the mast, right? And she ripped off, and all of a sudden, just poking up out of the water, I see the top of the mast coming again, right? And that flag just slowly raises out, right? It's stretched tight one more time because we're blowing 25, 30 knots, right? And that flag went from, just all soaking wet, stretched out that one last time straight out. And then all the cable stays and everything caught up. And then she slowly just slid under again that final time.
Wow.
It was almost like she was waving to me.
Nice. How long did it take for the guys to get you?
Not long. I was in the water maybe 10 or 15 minutes.
Let's touch on that maritime brotherhood. So from your first Mayday, there was an immediate response, and that's the code.
Oh yeah. And we would do that even to the guy you hate, and there's very few people I hate, but you know how it is. Even the guy you dislike, you know what I mean? If they have trouble, we're gonna make sure they get home first and foremost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's the same I think everywhere.
Yep.
So what about some good times? Obviously, you've had a lot of those.
Oh yeah. I mean, one of the there's been so many, but like in that boat that I lost, the first time we really hit the fish, and we were the last boat on the fish, we were getting the haddock. It was haddock. And I got pictures of that boat. We were hauling the nets that day, and it was rough out. And literally, you couldn't put another haddock on the boat. I mean, we were putting them where we stayed. We were putting them in the cabin. We were putting them everywhere. And, a big wave would come, and 500 pounds would just slide off the top of the pile. There's just no more place to put fish, you know what I mean? And, those were some of the great times, as well as other times, like in the tuna fishery, when my son Joe was with me. He was about 9 when I caught the biggest fish of my life, and it was a 1,200-pound tuna fish. The cool part is, we're out there, we're marking that fish, we couldn't get him to bite, we seen him for hours on the screen, and then Joe finally jigged up a little live bait, right, because we couldn't jig up no bait because that fish was right under the boat. It scared all the bait, and he finally gets one live bait. After all our dead baits, we just couldn't hook this fish. And we banged that on the hook, and me and the guys, it was on that boat, it was on the hard merch, and so we all had to run up forward to watch the machine and watch the bait settle in, and, Jay, I'll never forget the look on Jay, Joe, and I, right? We're up watching the machine, and that fish comes back, and we just, it was slow motion and all. I had, we literally on the machine, we saw it eat the bait, and we all turn our heads, and the rod folds right over, and a few hours later, we get what turned out to be the biggest fish of my life. It was a 1,200-pound giant bluefin tuna. But the cool part, that was the biggest fish of my son's life, too, right? And, that's a story. He was 9 years old. Jay was with us. And that's a story that we're going to tell, till we both go to the grave. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's one that he'll probably tell his kids.
What an amazing moment.
Yeah.
For both of you, really.
Yeah. And, he was little at the time, too. He was so small, we used to had to, how you guys were fighting the fish on the rod today, we used to have to flip over a fish tote for him at the time so he could stand up and reach the reel, and he'd be standing on top of a fish tote.
So he helped fight it.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
A trial by fire, just like you guys, right? We give you the basic instructions, and then we set you guys to work on the rod, and then all we ask is just let us close the deal right at the end, because that's where experience helps.
And you guys will see that picture posted here at some point. Okay, so 1,200 pounds. I can't even imagine that. I mean, the one we caught today was maybe close to 300, 275.
Yeah, 300 pounder figure, yeah.
And so 1,200, that just had to, would that have even fit? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that would have been tricky. On this boat, I haven't tested that door to see how big it is, right?
Yeah.
But on the hard merch, Now, if people have watched the show, we pull him up over the rail. And that was the one fish on that boat. I was never able to get it over the rail. It was too long. So I took the stern out. That's an open lobster boat, right? So we took the rod holders off the stern. We had to unbolt those. And we used a block and tackle. And we just got his head up on the stern. And then all three of us, kind of just rolled his tail on the boat. And then we put the stern back in.
Boy. You got any pictures of this fish?
No, I don't, because look that was before cell phones, right?
Right.
And at the time, back in the day, like that was a curse of death, for the crew to bring a camera. You know what I mean? Like you didn't bring a camera, that was bad luck. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Where do you see yourself going from where you're at now? What do you see in the future?
Oh, in the future, I see us having a fantastic charter business, right? And what's cool for me, the fringe benefits, right, from being a part of the show. I got into fishing because of that passion for fishing. Again, with my Uncle Joe fishing with a bobber and minnow, right? And I used to dream, we used to read the Saltwater Sportsman and all that sport fishing and bill fishing. And, when I was a kid, that was my dream to do that someday. Now, because of the show, I get invitations to do that all over the place, Mm-hmm. Like, especially November 4th, my wife and I are going to Cabo, Mexico to put satellite tags in striped marlin. And, the trade-off is for a whole week we're going to be going on those fancy sport boats.
And you're going to have to catch them.
Right. And we're going to, catch them. But, it's going to be sport fishing. You know what I mean? And like, so it's kind of coming full circle for me. Again, at late in my career. I won't say the end of my career, but late in my career. Now I'm getting all these opportunities. We were in Australia this year in June. Again, because of the show. The company that gave me the winches for the boat, right? And plus, that's a trade-off. They give you free stuff because obviously they want to see it on the show, right?
Yeah, I'm jealous of your Simrad equipment.
Well, yeah. Simrad's been a great sponsor to work with. And, you team up with these companies. And my wife and I were in Australia with the winch company, Lone Star Marine, for these winches we use for our anchors. And best in the business, by the way, Lone Star Marine. You can look them up. But so my wife and I wound up in Australia for 3 weeks on the Gold Coast to do a boat show down there. So in the fisherman part of me, right, was just the way my schedule worked. I had already had a fundraiser in San Diego planned in June. So we went to Australia and I was fishing southern bluefins in the Southern Ocean. And then a week later I was fishing in the Pacific Ocean for Pacific bluefin at the fundraiser. And then a week after that, I was fishing back here in Massachusetts for giant Atlantic bluefin.
Did you try?
So in 3 weeks, I fished in 3 oceans on the planet.
Very awesome.
So like that's been the fringe benefits of being part of the show.
Is there a species you haven't caught yet that's still on your bucket list?
Yeah, I would have to say this. I've been asked that before. I want to go to Australia and catch those black marlin. Now, when we went, it was the wrong time of year, but look, those are the big ones. But a good second place will be a blue marlin if I get a chance to do that. But that's just cool.
Aren't there some blues down in Cabo?
There should be, but we're going at the wrong time of year. Okay. In November when we go, striped marlin are very abundant. And with the company I'm going with, Gray's Taxidermy, and they have a tagging program, Gray's Tagging, the interest, the focus of this fishing trip to get these satellite tags and striped marlin, because that's what they want to learn more about at the time.
Okay. So with all the experience the show has brought you, that's great. In all the years of commercial fishing we'll just call it the private sector when you weren't on TV, what advice would you have for young guys? Because at least on the West Coast, we're losing a lot of our young guys.
Yeah.
What advice would you have for young guys that are trying to get in the fishing industry?
Look, I get emails like that all the time. People see the show and they want to get in. And look, it's a tough business now. The regulatory process has made it very hard to make a living fishing. And I think it's one of the tragedies, although there's good points in bringing the fish back. One of the negatives is, look, when I started fishing, you went fishing because you needed to make a living. But basically, these days, to get into fishing, if you've got enough money to get into fishing, you don't need to fish for a living. I think that's a definite negative. Because again, who's got $1 million to get into any game and start playing, right? If you got $1 million, look, if I had $1 million when I thought about getting into the fishing industry, I certainly would have gotten it, spent it on getting into the fishing industry. I would have used that $1 million for a lot of other things, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And nowadays, we see it all the time. The people getting into fishing are either just big corporations using it for a write-off, or a bunch of guys who made their millions somewhere else and are like, oh, I always wanted to be a fisherman. There's very few guys who get in like I did, who just had a desire to fish and work their way up from scrubbing bait cups to running somebody else's boat to finally buying their own boat. It's just not possible anymore.
Yeah, it's still a dream for a lot of guys.
Yeah.
Still a dream.
Yeah, and I'm not saying don't do it, but it's going to be a lot harder than you think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's not the fishing part. I know there's a lot of great fishermen out there. It's just the way it's gone to such a financial stake. I mean, it's a huge gamble. And again, I can look, if I had the money that it took to get into fishing these days, I can think of a lot of better things to do with that $1 million.
Okay, so from where you're at right now, obviously fishing's given you a lot.
Yeah.
Would you change anything?
No. I mean, we're fortunate. Look, I made a living fishing, but I never made a killing. And there was times where I wish I made different decisions, you know. I won't lie. But all in all, what it does show is if you're good at something and you got a passion at it, stick with it, whether it's fishing or something else. And, because look what happened to me. In the long run, it came out good, and, the show has been a great opportunity for me, and I've said it in other interviews, right? For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm getting a little bit ahead in the rat race. So we made a living fishing, and we always hit, look, we had a modest house, and I've said it, we never had everything we wanted, but somehow fishing provided everything we needed, which is okay, right? But now we're finally getting a little bit ahead in the rat race, and, I've started retirement planning, and for any fishermen out there listening, that's a dream that not many of us had. That's what I'm doing with my TV money, right? Mm-hmm. My kids, my wife and I have a high school diploma, and we barely got that, and I mean, just barely. I was expelled from 3 different high schools, right? And my old man was going to ship me off to military school, and I begged him for one last chance. But we'll save that story for the book, right? So to see both my kids, and we got, our youngest one is a few years away, but, my son and my daughter, Angelica and Joseph, they've got their degrees, and they've used that extra TV money to pay off that student loan. And now they're starting to plan for their retirement.
That's a good feeling.
Yeah. And that's what it's meant for our family, For other guys, it's meant other things, but we'll take that, I have a retirement portfolio. Those are words I never thought I would utter as a fisherman.
Right.
Right? And let's be honest. For me, I get it. I'm not Brad Pitt. Retirement doesn't mean a mansion in L.A., right? But if I could get to the point where I could fish when I want to, not because I have to, I'll call that retirement.
That'd be a good one. You do enjoy going out on these charters, though.
Oh, absolutely. Look, it's great seeing you guys. That has been, whether the show or the charter business, right? It has been one of those things that have reminded me how fortunate I am to be a fisherman. Because let's face it, I'll admit, I kind of took that for granted on one level, right? And the other fishermen out there like me know, we are fortunate. I've seen thousands of spectacular sunrises and sunsets out fishing. But at one level, it's work, right? But with the show and with charter clients, when I see people like today get to bring people out to come and experience what we do and see the smiles on their faces, and see them experience, again, that thing that we kind of took for granted. And I get that a lot of comments from people who watch the show. They said, thank you for letting us into your world and letting us see what you get to see every day.
Well, I came on here at Tuna Virgin.
Right.
That's my first one today. So, and to see them up close, they're a
Yeah,
much more graceful, beautiful, powerful creature than you can imagine.
Right, and that's why, even when we're doing this fishery, the commercial fishery's closed, and we're doing some tagging, releasing, it is quite a spectacular thing. And I never have clients complain when they have to release a fish, because you've seen it, right?
Yeah.
Generally, it's always the biggest fish they've caught in their life, and it is a pretty beautiful thing to witness.
Yeah. But not only was this my first tuna, but it was the biggest fish that I've been a part of.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm glad we made it happen.
Okay, Dave, I thank you again for taking the time to sit down with us and talk about this today. I had a really great day.
Awesome. No, I'm glad it all came together like it did, because at first we talked about just doing an interview sometime when I get in from fishing for this time that you were going to be around.
Mm-hmm.
And then it worked out right at the end here. We had an available date, and you grabbed some of your buddies, and we went out and caught a fish. I can't think of a way to have an interview like this happen any better.
Yeah, no, it's just it's a what do you call it? A caveat at the end, or what do you call it?
Yeah,
just a bonus.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay. So guys, it's once again Galley Stories, and if that's all you got, Dave, that's all that I got.
I just will one shout out for if anybody's interested in doing a charter or checking out anything else about the boat more in detail, you can visit our website at FV as in fishing vessel hardmerchandise.com, and you can see more about us, or of course order any of your shirts, hats, or bobbleheads, or book a trip.
And also follow him on
Instagram. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Captain Marciano, or we have the boat accounts FV Falcon and FV Hard Merchandise, which is my son's boat now.
Also follow Galley Stories, guys, on Instagram and Facebook. And one more thing, if somebody wanted, some of my listeners that may be more deadliest catch guys, because we're mainly on the West Coast, if they wanted to start binge watching Wicked Tuna, would they do that at National Geographic or
National Geographic Channel is our channel, and you can find it online, different places, but I don't know much about that. But we are on the National Geographic Channel.
Excellent. Okay, guys, so start binge watching that Wicked Tuna, and if you have any questions for Captain Dave, feel free to write into Mark at Galley Stories or galleystories@gmail.com. We'll forward them on to him, and I'm sure he'd be gracious enough to
Absolutely. Thank you again.
All right, we'll see you guys later.
Thanks for listening to Galley Stories. We hope you like what the net brought in. Please leave us a review on iTunes. Whether you like it or not, we're not fishing for compliments. Look us up on Facebook and Twitter too, and reach out to us at galleystories@gmail.com.